Thank you all. I'm Paul, and that's Martin there, just in case you were confused. It's great to be here. It's great to see you all, and it's great to have a full house. It really is, because I was here last year and we were still post-pandemic, and it's great to be beyond that. That was one challenge for the health service. We're going to deal with all the other health service challenges that we can find. I'm really pleased to be here with Martin. Every day as a health reporter, you know, I'm writing about waiting lists, new cancer drugs, mental health centres and whatever. And there's always so much to write about, but every so often I stop and think and say, could we not do it differently? Why do we spend so much money, and we spend an awful lot of money on our health service relative to other countries, and why does so much of it not work properly? And then you come across people like Martin, whose specific expertise is in digital healthcare, and they have ideas about how things might be done differently. But unfortunately, sometimes those stories, those suggestions made by people like Martin and others that I've written about and that I've come across aren't listened to. So how can we learn from this? And that's what I hope over the next hour that we will be able to delve into, and I'll take questions from the audience later on. But I understand, Martin, first of all, you're going to do something of your own introduction, is it, by way of video?
Absolutely, yeah. And thanks, Paul, and thanks, Katrina, for the invite. It's absolutely fabulous to be here, and hopefully this is going to be a conversation of hope and what we might be able to do, and actually what we have to do. There's actually no choice. So we've two videos to start. They're both a minute, and we actually had a debate beforehand. I wanted to throw so much video, so much PowerPoint at you, but it's going to be, I lost. So let's run these two videos, and then we'll get into the conversation. Yeah.
Professor Martin Curley is at Net Events, calling for governments, digital healthcare leaders, professionals and citizens to work together to avert a looming crisis in global healthcare. Martin, perhaps you could start by telling us a bit about you.
Great, Julian. Well, I'm Martin Curley. I'm an electronic engineer. Originally, I spent most of my career in the tech industry with Intel and Philips and GE and MasterCard. But over the last 5 years, I've been working in healthcare. And I believe actually some of the insights that I gained working for tech firms are really applicable to healthcare transformation. So that's what I'm really focused on. And my mission is around driving a global digital transition for healthcare. And now the second clip, Oisin.
Hello, Dr. O'Reilly.
Perhaps an antibiotic and something, a cough bottle for that. And they're going to deliver the drugs back to you by drone delivery.
Okay, no problem. I'm 70 years of age and we're told to stay in, so we've stayed in, we've never gone out anywhere. Oh sure, it's absolutely brilliant. I thought I'd never see the day that there'd be such technology that I wouldn't have to be driving into town and back home to get my medicine.
Great.
Great. So Martin, so you're an engineer and you were many years in Intel, one of the biggest companies in the world. So how did you make it over to health? Was it because of projects like that or the possibility that kind of technology offers?
Sure. So I'm an electronic engineer and I did a lot of work in systems, and at Intel we did a lot of work in digital manufacturing. And I would say a modern semiconductor fab is about 10 times, maybe 100 times more complex than a modern day hospital. And technologies that we deployed in Intel Leakslip and all around the world 30 years ago are still more advanced than the technologies we have in our acute hospital. So when you go into a hospital like Katrina's husband sadly did, you monitor 5 or 6 vital signs. In semiconductor manufacturing, maybe you have 150 variables that you're managing in real time. And a lot of the technologies and techniques can be really applied to healthcare. So take, for example, we have 3 million medication errors a year in Ireland, and sometimes that's innocuous, sometimes it actually kills people. But we had that problem in Intel 30 years ago. Misprocessing of wafers, 3% of misprocessing. We built software, and we haven't, at Intel hasn't misprocessed a wafer in 30 years. But to come to your question, I wrote a book 19 years ago, How Do You Fix Broken IT Organizations? I had the privilege of doing that at Intel. I got to talk to CIOs around the world, and I taught these practices. And we founded an institute in Maynooth, and we've surveyed over 100 or 700 companies. And a couple of people approached me. The CIO position at the HSE was open. I've been talking about since 2012 that digital is the medicine for the healthcare, for the broken healthcare industry. So I put my name in the hat and was offered the job, and that's how I got into the HSE. But I'm deeply committed to healthcare. The application of digital healthcare digital to healthcare is really, it's a fantastic opportunity.
You came from this corporate environment, and then you entered the HSE, which is one of the biggest employers here. Huge budget, probably not the most dynamic organisation in its reputation. How did you get on? What was your
So I've said it before, so I'll say it again.
Yeah.
After 3 days, I thought I died and gone to hell. Actually, the first month or two were really good, and I talk a lot about stay left, shift left, 10x, and people are going to say that's jargon. But by the end of this conversation, I hope you know what that means.
So were you speaking a different language to the people in there?
Not really, actually, because the first 2 months went really well, and we had an event at the convention centre, and we launched Stay Left, Shift Left 10x, and we had 8 or 9 companies saying, here's how we're going to help Irish healthcare stay left, shift left 10x. But then
You better explain.
I'll come to that in a second,
yeah.
but we took an instrument, it's called the ITCMF, and we did an assessment of the IT organization, and we've done 700 of these, like we did the Department of Transportation, Chevron, Lloyds Banking, and then when I looked at the scores, it was probably one of the lowest scores we'd ever seen. So the future that I wanted to build couldn't be built on quicksand. So I quickly realized I couldn't do it. I was the Chief Information Officer. So I went to John Connaughton, who was he was the COO, and he then went to be NHS Scotland. We mutually agreed I would take on a new role. I'd actually written a book called Open Innovation 2.0, and this is a methodology for transforming an industry. I'd used this approach at Intel, been hugely successful, and John agreed to back me. And he said, okay, go, but you've no budget, you've no employees. And thankfully, I think Ross Cullen is in the audience here. I was very lucky, Ross Cullen and a lady called Lorraine Smith.
No budget?
No budget, started the worker. So this was a complete entrepreneurial startup.
No, but this is in the HSE.
In the HSE, but what we were quickly able to do is work with doctors and nurses, and people started to put in money, and we were we had 40 or 50 living labs. One of the...
So what did you achieve? I mean,
so many things, like within...
Some examples.
Let's just look at that video. Right. So we were probably the first health service in the world to actually have telehealth working. We had that done in 2 weeks. We introduced e-prescribing in 2 weeks, and that was something that had been blocked for 15 years, and we did it in 2 weeks. We had 2 meetings, 5 people.
So that development that happened early in the pandemic, where suddenly we didn't have these pieces of paper going into the chemists, e-prescribing, so you were centrally involved in that, were you?
Well, I drove it. I called, and Niall Sinnott from the Department of Health worked with me, but I called Dara O'Loughlin, and this is an interesting story. I called Dara, he's the head of IPU, said, Dara, we need to fix this, come to my office the following morning. I called Fintan Voy, who's the CEO of the Irish College, and he came the following morning, and Eileen Byrne, and she is the CEO of Clanwilliam, most of the doctor surgeries, and we had 2 meetings, and it was done. the first day we saw 400 prescriptions transferred, the second day 800. By the third day it was 20,000.
Yeah.
And quickly we went to 50,000. So that was done in 2 weeks. But the funny story is I live in Naas. I've never been to Punchestown, and I was unemployed when I left the HSE. I was going to start. So I went to Punchestown. I walked in. The first person I heard, Dara says to me, "Hi, Martin, what are you doing here?" So he's now chair of Horse Racing Ireland. He took out his phone. Here's the iPhone. He said, "Each of the horses now, I'm not suggesting we do this, has an RFID chip. I can just scan it. I can see all their vaccination records." So our horses are better instrumented than humans. And one of my colleagues, John Shaw, he says, people will look back and say, what were people thinking in 2023, that our cars are better instrumented? We know more about our cars than we do about humans.
So, but that's what I'm asking about. And this ties in with the pandemic then. There was that, one of the silver linings of the pandemic was that we kicked on and we innovated. So why did we move on from that, or did we move on from that? Did you?
Yeah, and
once you've done this e-prescribing,
there's a phenomenon called Big Bang adoption, and what happened, there was just such urgency, and people were so desperate we needed solutions. But the second thing that was really important, the people that would normally block actually were too scared or were doing other things. So we were able to introduce these technologies. So within 2 days of COVID being here, we had introduced a remote respiratory monitoring solution. And that simply was, we gave people a pulse oximeter, it was linked to their phone, and they could be at home, and we could detect if their oxygen saturation level in COVID. What you need to worry about is your oxygen saturation level. People were looking at temperature, but what really mattered was oxygen saturation level. So we gave that to thousands and thousands of people, and I've had hospital CEOs and ED consultants saying to me, "Martin, thank you so much for that technology," because they didn't want to be admitted to their own hospitals. But if I can give one other example, so we then went further. The first weekend that COVID was here with Professor Richard Costello, and Miles Murray is a fabulous entrepreneur in Cork. We put his technology into Beaumont Hospital, and that's a small device that sits on your diaphragm, and it wirelessly transmits your respiration rate. There were two really interesting things that we found. First, we found that all around the world people were using oxygen saturation rate. But we found that respiration rate, we could have up to 12 hours notice of a patient desaturating. So this was life-saving, and also avoided people going to ICU. Now for 200 years, nurses have been measuring respiration rates manually. Can anybody guess what the error rate, because we did an experiment, the error rate of nurses reading respiration rates, and not because they're bad nurses, but can anybody guess what? Paul, would you guess?
I don't know, 1%.
So 80% of respiration rates were read incorrectly, and this is not because they're bad nurses, but it's actually, so now we have an instrument. It's the most sophisticated in the world, and we deployed it into 23 hospitals. One of the leading clinical engineers is actually in Beaumont. She said, this could never have happened before. Right. This would have taken 5 years or never, and we did it in 4 months.
So you came from industry, you brought the mentality of an engineer and also the aircraft industry. We also about perfection and learning and feedback loops and all that. You ran into the pandemic, but these innovative projects were introduced. It all sounds great, but things started to go a bit sour after that.
Absolutely, and the respiratory technology that we introduced, there's a fabulous example here in Galway. Mike O'Mahony, we introduced that, and he introduced it for CF patients, and the results were phenomenal. The average time to stay was reduced from 12 days to 5 days. Every CF patient saved about €900 in terms of travel costs, and we're saving up to 3 days. But we got to 1,000 patients across the country, maybe 20, 30 consultants. Everybody loved it, and it stopped. We shared that technology with the NHS. NHS recently announced they had 100,000 patients using this approach, and we're stuck at 1,000. And the inability to actually scale these technologies, and in fact, actually the resistance, it wasn't just they don't care, it was actively resisting these technologies.
And how do you explain that resistance?
I have been quoted, before, so I'll say it again. I think there were people that preferred power to purpose, patience, and progress. So,
and why do you think that is?
I
We're in the health-
personally,
we're talking about health here.
don't understand it because, you know, when I worked at Intel, everybody works towards a common mission and vision. And you do occasionally get bad apples, but they get sorted out quickly, and bullying is completely not tolerated. But, you know, I've been quoted, and I'll say it again, in some places, bullying is the management methodology. And I work with a fabulous nurse, I'm not going to mention her name. She took on our respiratory technology. She was using it in Midlands Hospital and for heart failure patients. And brilliant innovation. The normal readmission rate for heart failure patients is 30%. In a year, she didn't have a single heart failure patient admitted.
Right.
But she, unfortunately, was bullied out of the hospital. I called the clinical director and he said, Martin, that nurse is probably the best nurse I've ever worked with. I can't do anything. She immediately left. She went to Basra just to clear her head, and she's been doing emergency nursing. She's just back from the DR Congo. So the best people, there's a cultural issue, there's a leadership issue, and it all comes from the leader. I'm very hopeful. Bernard Gloucester has gone in. Yeah. He's been in healthcare. He's a nice man. He actually knows how to make decisions. He's putting pressure on the blockers. He knew what was going on. And so I'm really hopeful. And Bernard Gloucester, Robert Watt is not a man to mess with as well. And I believe the combination of Robert Watt, Bernard Gloucester, and Breda Smith. So Breda is a Galwegian. She's the chief medical officer. The first thing she said when she was appointed, I'm going to work on health equity. So the standard of care in Ireland is rated good, but we're last in Europe for health equity and accessibility.
Having put your head under the bonnet and had a look then about the health service that we do have, how would you rate it, and where do you see the problem?
Okay, for that I have a few slides. So,
Funny, I should have asked you that.
You know, Deming said, you know, in God we trust, but for all else we have data. So I teach a master's, and we're just going to talk through the slides. And after about 20 minutes, this is some of the first material I show our doctors and our nurses, and they say, stop, Martin, we've had enough. So I just want to give you some data. I want to acknowledge first we've deeply committed and competent and passionate clinicians, but they're being served by Victorian tools. They are tired, they're fatigued, they're despondent. I want to say healthcare is hard. It is not easy. It's really difficult under the current paradigm, but there's a new way we could do this where it becomes easier. I mentioned quality of care is good, we're low. So first, we're a big spender. We're, according, and there's a couple of different interpretations. We're number 2 in the OECD countries in terms of spending. I suspect the UK have overtaken us, but we're still right up there. But we actually have the youngest population. Okay, well that's missing. But our really big problem is we are number 80 in the world based on the most factual description of a health system. So we're looking at infrastructure, professionals, costs, medicine availability, and government readiness. Look at some of the countries that are ahead of us: Albania, Nigeria, Kuwait, and we're the 12th most prosperous country in the world. In fact, our GDP per capita is number 2 in the world. Another one has us at number 86, but our waiting lists have doubled since launch of care. We have the highest amount of respiratory admissions in Europe, despite having the cleanest air. We have an 18-month wait list for echo tests. Cree here in Galway is a brilliant example of how we should be doing healthcare. And you know, we're on track for a $2 billion spend. We have very high excess mortality rates consistently, you know, for the last 4 or 5 months, and I have to give Pater Tobin credit for calling this out. Our excess mortality rates, 11, 12, 13%. Can I give you an example? The Australian ambassador, you know, we shut down all cervical cancer services here during COVID. The Australian ambassador, Gary Gray, his wife, Pippa, would actually pick up Australian women that were diagnosed with cervical care and drive them to the airport, and they would be flown to Sydney for treatment. So we have this huge backlog of stuff that wasn't dealt with. We have the fullest hospitals in Europe. Denmark is spending about the same as us, and has about the same beds. Now, Austria is another company I'll compare with. They have more beds, but it's not about your capacity. But if we look at a ranking, the 2 worst performers in the world in terms of health systems are the USA and Ireland. You get great care in the USA, but it's incredibly expensive. I'll just finish with a couple of last data points. I was out at the World Health Assembly recently. This is Alan Lebrique, who's the the director of digital health with the World Health Organization. We're looking at our digital capability. This is the ranking. Ireland is ranked at number 2, but you can see some of the Kazakhstan actually is 4. Italy is 5. So there's a lot that we have to do, but we actually know how to do this, and it's just about having the political will. We've many, many solutions. If they're deployed, like a personal electronic health record on the phone, we have the ability to leapfrog.
Okay. I mean, like I'm a health journalist, and my email inbox is filled with companies trying to tell me that their technology, their drugs are the best, and they're the saviors for our health system. And the one thing that's true across all those things is that they cost a lot of money. Technology costs a lot of money. Health technology costs a lot of money. Do you really think that technology is the savior, the potential savior for the problems of the Irish Health Service?
Absolutely. Well, it's technology and data, and healthcare is an information-intensive business. And can you imagine a pilot flying a plane and he's not really sure what the altitude is, not really sure what the service record is, what's the fuel level? It's estimated doctors, when they're faced with a patient, they have about 17% of the information that's needed to make a correct decision. Or ask, well, what medication are you on? So for the price of a cup of coffee, we can give everybody in Ireland a personal electronic health record on their phone. Now, it might be a couple of cups of coffee, but I put Mohammed Ayub Ali is he's a consultant in the UK who has a rare disease, and he got completely fed up with repeating and all the records and the pay. So we built a solution. I put him under pressure, Mohammed. What would it cost if we give this to and it's the price of a cup of coffee? So I have my personal electronic health record. It's taken data from my Fitbit. I have my MRI, I have my colonoscopy, and GDPR says the patients own the data. 90% of hospitals in Europe, including Ireland, won't allow patients access to their data. We now have a solution where everybody, and we're working.
So you're saying let the data reside with the patient rather than in some big central
exactly,
and
it will be in the cloud, and in fact it's at least 10 times more secure than having your data in a HSE hospital. So this works. It's probably 100 times more, but don't quote me. It's all about architecture. So what has happened, the global healthcare system, we've made remarkable progress. If this was 200 years ago, most of us wouldn't be in the theatre because we did. The life expectancy was 29.7. Now we've more than doubled that. But it's all about data, and we can empower people. And one of the things that I want to do, and I'm going to show you a quick video if I may, we want everybody, Ireland is the only country in Europe that hasn't committed to give everybody a personal electronic health record by 2030. We have such an appalling record. Since 2004, it's been government strategy to deliver this.
Yeah.
I have to say, this conversation...
Why has it not happened?
Yeah, let's show the video, and we'll be a bit more positive. I'll come back to that. So this is what we'd like to happen for everybody in Ireland. Hopefully, yeah. So this is a 1-minute video, and we can make this happen for everybody in Ireland for the price of a PCR test. I was the best they could get for the money available, though.
You got a free Fitbit, was it?
Yeah. But I replaced my old one. You can see I had one on before. Stay Left, Shift Left 10X is our national strategy to transform our healthcare system. And what we've done today here in Careplus and Dunboyne is actually really historic. We are providing a screening process, a personal electronic health record, and an enrolment into a program where you use a Fitbit or other device and have a wellness app. And this can potentially transform the health of everybody in Ireland and actually transform our healthcare system.
So you're not the only person using this phrase. You better explain it to people because it's not immediately obvious. Stay left,
Shift left, 10X.
What does that mean?
Okay, so healthcare is really complex, and I want all of you to leave here understanding what Stay Left, Shift Left, 10X. There will be an examination afterwards. So Stay Left's about keeping well people well. Many of us actually are born well, not all of us, and that's why we have healthcare systems. So Stay Left is about staying well and proactively keeping us well. But it's also about, if you have a chronic condition or need rehab, that we can do that best of all from home. So for example, Solaso are a company based in Kerry, and during COVID, 1,000 physios used their service free of charge, and they were conducting, rehab in the home, and people could stay at home. I had a conversation with David O'Malley. He's an Irish guy. He's a senior VP for VNS Health in New York. And actually, his dad heard me on the radio, and he reached out, "Oh, David, you need to listen to this guy, Curley." But he works for VNS Health, and their motto, it's all about the future of health in the comfort of your home. So Stay Left is doing everything at home. Shift Left's about getting people as quickly as possible from a hospital to a community and into the home. So we now have technologies, for example, a device that I can wear on my arm that gives better vital signs from the home than you would actually have in most Irish hospitals. So a hospital or a doctor or a nurse can actually remotely monitor you. And then 10X is the idea of 10 times. When you apply digital technology to healthcare, and healthcare is an information business, you get 10X returns. So 10 times cheaper, 10 times faster, 10 times better. So let me give you an example. So in Bunclody is a hotbed for the future of healthcare in Ireland. There's James Doyle is CEO, a company called Tunstall Emergency Response, and they are monitoring people all over the country, about 55,000 people. Some of them are wearing this device. It's a pan, and it's remotely monitoring stuff like your pulse rate, etc. But if a person falls, and falls is a massive issue, it costs us €1 billion. Within 20 seconds, you get a live person speaking to you through the phone to say, "Hey, Paul, you've just fallen. Do you need help?" If Paul doesn't respond, they know the GPS coordinates, and they actually can dispatch somebody. And this recently happened. Mary, my partner, her neighbour fell. There was actually a chip pan on, and thankfully, the emergency services got there, got the lady and home. But the 10X is one person is able to monitor 800 people. In the past, it was one doctor, one nurse, one person. Now we have one person is able to look at 800 people, and we can immediately detect, Katrina's breathing rate or pulse rate or blood pressure has gone up. We need to intervene there. So Stay Left, Shift Left 10X is about what we call a Copernican shift. Now, Copernicus, he was the guy.
That guy, yeah.
Yeah, he was the guy in 1543 said, the earth actually revolves around the sun. And gosh, of course, it's obvious, but he was persecuted. And when I say this to some doctors, they look at me and say, you're smoking something. Whereas a lot of other people think that is right. So we start by maintaining people. Well, this pharmacy check, what we're finding, 1 in 5 people actually have a chronic risk factor. And if you think chronic disease, something really important, a shift has happened over the last 100 years. A lot of people used to die from infectious diseases. Now the primary cause of death is chronic disease. So in the US, 70% of people die from chronic diseases that are either unmanaged or undetected, and 90% of the healthcare cost is from chronic diseases. So we have to get on top of this, and we can't cure it, but we can reverse it. So if we find it immediately, we can reverse it.
I don't see any great conflict between what you're saying and what's supposed to be in Sláinte Care, which is the Bible for the reform of the health.
It is completely aligned, and Sir Kieran Devan, he's our chairman. We initiated a digital academy forum, which every quarter we ran, thought leadership, and Kieran spoke at one of them for me, and he opened up and said, "Stay left, shift left underpins the HSE's corporate plan and Sláintecare, and yet we ran into headwinds. So I'll give an example. We launched this service in Mullingar with Robert Troy, who was the digital minister. So we had full government backing on this. We had 2 of the top doctors in the HSE actually attend the launch, and they actually troubleshooted the process. Yeah. But the other top doctor was prohibited from joining by an administrator. He said, "You're not going to Curley's event. You're not going, we're not doing that." And this is the kind of behaviors that need to be rooted out. And again, I'm very confident Bernard Gloss, Robert Watt, and Breda Smith are going to sort this out.
However, I'm getting the impression that, just if I can be a bit critical, there's a good project here, there's a good project there, there's some forward thinking there, and somebody there wants to do something. But does that amount to the potential for reforming a system as huge and as cumbersome as the Irish Health Service?
Absolutely. So in this book, we talk about 6 practices. So what I did with Bor Salmon from the Commission, we looked at why was Nokia successful, or why did Nokia fail, actually? Why was Intel, Apple? So we looked at all the processes, and one of the key things is the idea of a platform. So we're building a platform, and Ilya Prigogine, he was a Belgian-Russian Nobel Prize winner. He said when a system is far from equilibrium, small islands of cohesion have the ability to transform the system. So what we could witness is a metamorphosis. Right now, the Irish health system is a caterpillar. And some people are thinking about, let's put a caterpillar on wheels. But if we just make these small shifts, it'll become a butterfly. There genuinely is the opportunity. This is the first, we're at a really unique point in time where we've so many disruptive technologies, and we actually can leap forward. And it's so, because healthcare is an information business, we're in the information age, and IT and digital and data makes the costs of producing information, sharing information, the marginal costs are going to zero.
A lot of people with good justification would have concerns about data being shared, health data. There's nothing more personal than health data. Were you still in the HSE when the cyber attack occurred there?
I was.
Yeah, a classic example of.
And so a couple of things. Look, everybody, we all use Facebook. We all everybody's giving away so much personal information. These companies, so personal data or health data is personal. But as I said, on our phone, I can guarantee that the data on your personal electronic health record will be at least 10 times more secure, maybe 100 times more secure. The big cloud players like Amazon, like the Microsoft Azure, like AWS, they can afford to spend way much more on information security than even an organization like the HSE. So when I came into the HSE, I did a cybersecurity assessment. We were wide open. I was starting to lose sleep at night because I knew we were at risk. We actually had a cyber attack. And I'll share honestly, we got a ransom note, and my instinct was we should pay it. I was overruled by John Connaughton.
This was before.
This was before. Yeah, this was before. And John Connaughton said, "No, we're going to fight it." And thankfully, we were able to, deal with it. But I was really concerned. This actually could take the whole system down. So. I think people were aware, and we were looking at, and this is difficult.
Sorry, let me get this straight. There was a clear cyber attack that occurred before the big one.
Absolutely.
So there's plenty of warning about this.
There was warning, and we did a cybersecurity assessment. Now, it is difficult.
Was it wide open?
Yeah, well, it's all about architecture, and I don't particularly, I think there's lots of issues, and there was a report written on that. If we come back to the positive, what we need is a new architecture for a healthcare system. We architected around the person
but I'm asking
and around the phone.
To address people's fears about the sharing of data.
Well, I think if it's on your phone, so nothing is perfect and nothing you can guarantee, but I can guarantee if your data is on the phone and it's in one of the big hyperscalers, it's way more secure than being in a hospital. So I think if we, it's win-win. If we put the personal electronic health record on the phone, it's in the cloud, and it's like an arms race. Many years ago, I was responsible for corporate information security in Intel. I was living in Sacramento, and there was a massive denial service attack, and my boss got summoned to the White House, and I had to write the brief, and I learned a lot about what's called defensive information warfare. There's a lot of stuff we never hear about, but there's all sorts of, messy things going on. And it is an arms race, but I would be betting on a Google or a Microsoft. They can stay ahead. You know, the HSE or even the ESB or, you know, organizations like that, they can invest a little bit, but you have to rely on the professionals. And there is no guarantee. So it's win-win. We can do it cheaply, it's convenient, and it's a secure. You can't guarantee total security, but it's better than having it in a hospital or a...
So you left the HSE. You've spoken publicly in different forums, and with some measured criticism, I think, of the thing. Now, nobody would accuse you of being excessive in your criticisms. I think it's what you've said has resonated about. You talked about bad actors within the system. That's resonated with a lot of people. Are you and people, like-minded people, able to affect change outside the system? Or are you an observer now?
Oh, totally not. And I had been thinking about moving from the HSE. You know, in this book we talk about open collaborative ecosystems, and that might sound a little bit technical.
Does.
Explain that is, but that's basically a bunch of people that have shared values working towards a shared vision. So we now have a community of organizations, big companies like Medtronic and Cisco and Roche, small companies like Patient Empower and Tunstall, and patient associations that are working towards a shared vision. And the academic research, you know, there's some professors in Milan, Politecnico di Milano, Gastaldi et al., and what they said, I don't want to be, they said, open collaborative ecosystems are a fundamental mutation in the business competitive landscape. So what does that mean? That means that business is going to change, and it's the unit of competition is no longer how good your organization is, it's how good the ecosystem is. And they recommend the change of a healthcare system should be done from a university, and that's exactly what we're doing. So, you know, with the support of, you know, President Eva Leon, and they, you know, Minute recently just announced their strategic plan. There's 4 things that they want to focus on, and 3 of them are so aligned: health, digital, and sustainability. So we're working, what I showed you with Care Plus, we're now working with Irish Life Health. And we're going into a pilot where Irish Life, they provide, I use an app on my phone called My Life. Irish Life provided free to everybody. And we're working with Irish Life Health, we're working with Fitbit, we're working with AstraZeneca, we're working with some Irish startups. So we're going to trial this, and you can go either to Stack Pharmacies or Care Plus, and you can get this health check. And we're going to check it with 500 people. We're going to prove that it works. And we're already working with a regional grouping of TDs who are going to prepare a budget submission. You know, this just makes sense. So
you're saying all of this can happen, and the HSE will be left behind, effectively?
Well, I think the HSE will come on board and say, look, I'm very hopeful with you know, Robert Watt and Bernard Gloucester and Breda Smith that things are going to, and we already see change. Some of the bad actors and blockers, they've been sidelined. So, you know, it's like the Marines. The Marines have to go out and, you know, figure out the territory and grand, and then the rest of the army comes in behind them. So the HSE is a super tanker, and it's designed for stability, and you do need stability. A very large organization needs processes, procedures, and needs stability. But you also need to have innovation excellence and the ability to innovate. So I believe working in the university, and there's a lot of evidence around the world that universities can affect change. So we're building this trusted collaboration. We have lots of communications with the doctors and nurses from the university. Some of the living labs that we developed in the HSE are now ported to the university, and we can move much more agilely. And for a pharma company, they're actually much less restricted in terms of investing and doing the research with us. So I'm actually very, very hopeful, and I want everybody to leave here today saying there's real hope. We've looked at the data, we're in a really bad place, but this doesn't require open heart surgery. First, it needs political will. We're going to do this. And we actually have all the components. We have the best respiratory technology in the world. Heart failure, Dr. Donald Bailey, he's the CEO of Centric Health. He was a GP. He left the HSE twice because of the culture. But we ran a living lab. We took 150 patients with heart failure, and we monitored them from home. We've only had 1 hospitalization in a year and a half, and that's because we identified somebody, you need to take a new medication. They delayed for 3 days. So, you know, coming back to the 10x, in heart failure, we saw that a 10x reduction, 10 times reductions in hospitalization, it's the #1 cause of death. So 15.5% of us in the room are going to die from heart failure. So look around, maybe 20 of us are going to die from heart failure. But we have a technology now that will identify in real time, very simple, every couple of days you take your weight, you look at your SpO2, so we can keep so many people living longer. These people don't have to go to the hospital. We choose in Ireland to have care in the most expensive place, in the most,
of course we do.
The last moment. And it's just a really simple shift. And we don't need to spend 23 or 24 billion. This first Copernican shift is from illness to wellness. In Europe, we spend 97% on illness and just 3% on wellness. And in Ireland, we spend 2.7% on wellness. If we just shifted that to 8 or 9%, if everybody in Ireland could go to the pharmacy and in 15 or 20 minutes get a health check, you leave with a personal electronic health record, you leave with a Fitbit or an Apple device, and you leave with a report. And when we did this, we had to send a couple of people directly to A&E, and maybe in one of those cases that might have been life-saving. So it's about this complete shift, and the pharmacies are underutilized. Young pharmacists are leaving because they're not motivated, and they're the most trusted, medical professional. And the pharmacy
there is some evidence of change in that.
Exactly, and the new prescribing is coming. But imagine everybody in Ireland. You can go to your pharmacy. The pharmacy in 15 or 20 minutes you can have a test. And you get a report within a day and tells you have a risk factor, you can go address it. And what we found working with Full Health Medical, and Anne Short actually is an A&E consultant in Castlebar. She founded this company 10 years ago. And the reason she founded it is her dad had a catastrophic stroke. And she realized if I'd only seen his bloods 3 months before, this could be avoided. So there are people in this room, maybe even me. Well, I've recently had my check done. I identified a particular issue that I got addressed. But there are people in this room that actually have probably chronic risk factors, serious ones that they don't know about. But you can spend 15 or 20 minutes. You don't have to wait 2 hours waiting in a GP's for an appointment. You should be able to schedule online, go to your pharmacy, get the health check, and use a Fitbit device. Stephen McMahon, he's the chair of the Irish Patients Association. He was just telling me during the week, he diagnosed a critical issue for his wife just by using the Fitbit. And I have a fabulous video that I want to show you, which is about somebody who's a geriatric. I don't use that term, she doesn't use it, where she used the device. She went through all the tests in the hospital and they couldn't diagnose it. Between herself and her GP diagnose it. Can I run the video?
Run the video and then I'll take some questions afterwards.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, let's just...
Hello, my name is Dorian Enright and I'm going to recount an incident which occurred the beginning of January 2020 and how I obtained a diagnosis using technology, medical advice and self-management. My husband and I were out for a walk one morning. About 20 minutes into the walk, my heart started fluttering. As we moved on, it got stronger and stronger until about 10 minutes from home, I was getting very, very strong palpitations. I did manage to arrive home safely, and I went into the kitchen, took my blood pressure. It showed a very, very high blood pressure, irregular heart. I got my husband to screenshot the screen and checked my Fitbit, which showed huge spikes, some up to 200 beats a minute. At that point, I knew I had no alternative but to go to Mullingar Casualty. By the time we arrived at Casualty, my heart had stabilised. I showed one of the nurses the readout from my blood pressure, the Fitbit readings, and I was actually seen very, very quickly. I was transferred to the cardiac unit where I saw Dr. Cronin. I was given every test under the sun, including a stress test, echo, etc., full NCT. Unfortunately, everything was negative, and Dr. Cronin at that point was unable to give me any treatment or to make a diagnosis. Despite the negative tests, I knew that something was wrong. Dr. Cronin was very sympathetic and she recommended a Holter. She also suggested a Cardia Mobile might prove useful as it was an ECG monitor that I could use at home. I got a 48-hour Holter from the GP. Unfortunately, it showed very little, just a minor blip, but the Cardia proved absolutely invaluable. This is the cardia. As you can see, it's conveniently placed at the back of my phone. To take an ECG, I just put my fingers at the back, press record. It takes 30 seconds and gives me the reading. You can see the recordings and it gives you a full history. Each time I had an episode after that, I recorded it on the cardia. Finally, I went to the GP armed with my cardia history and the irregularities shown on the Fitbit and was referred to a cardiologist. Predominantly on the basis of the cardia, I was diagnosed with supraventricular tachycardia, following which I had an ablation and I've been fine since. The cardia mobile was not only beneficial for myself, but 2 other members of my family, in particular my sister, who was diagnosed with atrial fibrillation following the use of the cardia. It shows that how treatment and diagnosis can be improved when technology, medical advice and self-management come together. Thank you for listening. I hope this shows that us, geriatrics, a word I detest, can use technology and equipment just as usefully as the younger generation. Thank you.
This is great. Thanks very much. I said I'd take some questions. I've got bright lights on me, so do we have a roving mic? Ah, ta-da. And I see a person there. I think there's a microphone going to come down to you. Thank you very much. You just wait a second.
Thanks very much, Martin, for that. Can I just ask you about the ecosystem you're talking about, and if you see any conflicts between the private interest and the public interest? You talked about all of the companies that are involved in that ecosystem. How do you manage those conflicts? Because I think there has to be conflicts with the profit motive, for private sector interests.
This comes up all the time. Well, what I would say, and thanks for the question, we cannot rely on the Department of Health and particularly the HSE to fix this. But more and more, Friedman had an economic theory 50 years ago. What more and more we're talking about the economy of mutuality. And this is where companies are driven by purpose and progress and people and also profit. I actually think they can really coexist. And the kind of people that are working in this ecosystem, it's about high trust. And actually we've rejected a few companies, because I had one company actually in Ireland that came and they were boasting about how much they extracted from the HSE during COVID, and that was the last time we ever talked to them. So, for example, Medtronic are the biggest employer almost in Ireland. They're huge, and I recently had dinner here in Galway with Jeff Martha, the CEO. He's deeply committed to fixing healthcare in Ireland, as are so many of these corporate CEOs. What I've witnessed, and unfortunately I left Intel, for me it was a very difficult decision, but the previous CEO, Paul Ottolini, who sadly passed away, his vision was, he would say, this decade we're going to create and extend computing technology to connect and enrich the lives of everybody on the planet. And that spoke to me. And it actually worked for change. Like, it was huge social change, but it turns out to work for business, because under Paul, Intel's net revenue, cumulative revenues and cumulative net income were more than all of the other CEOs combined. And a new CEO came in to replace Paul. And he and I said to him, we were doing wonderful things in Leakslip. And at the end of it, he said, Martin, that's great, the Internet of Things. But I said to him, Brian, whatever you do, keep Paul's vision. And he said, screw that, Martin, I'm not interested. It's all about the profit. So we have a self-selection into this ecosystem, and it's only people that understand. I've written a book actually with a brilliant Italian professor, Pier Formica, and it talks about towards an altruistic model of economy. And I think there's going to be a whole shift, like the economic theory of Friedman and others is breaking down, and it's about the whole idea that it's all about maximizing shareholder growth. It's about the communities, it's about the employees, and it is about growth. But if you focus on purpose, and if you focus on people and progress. The profit will come, and many people in the ecosystem are thinking like that. So, big business and some of the SMEs I work with, they are so motivated, and they're trying to sell to the HSE. Most Irish digital health SMEs have given up trying to sell to the HSE, and they're being wonderfully successful in the US, but they have to fly across the Atlantic. But their motivation is fixing many of the innovations. They had a problem that wasn't being addressed, and they've come up with the solution. And one of the best ones, if I can just give one example, is Food Marple is a tiny device. A guy that his girlfriend and now wife was suffering from IBS and used to get a yearly test to figure out what's going on. Now he has a device. It looks like it's 150 years, and his wife can monitor herself in real time and figure out what foods are causing her trouble. And he started a company because he saw a problem. They're now hugely successful, massive adoption in New Zealand. And I'll give you 10 other examples, but most of these people are motivated. One of my favorite people is Roisin Malloy. I have to talk about Roisin. So she's from Belfast. Her sister sadly died from terminal cancer. And she saw a problem. She took over the care. Every time the nurse went to take her sister's temperature, she was being woken up. She said, I can fix this. So she built an infrared thermometer that's non-contact. We were able, I got the fastest adoption decision in the history of the HSE. Contact is a big issue for spreading. And during COVID, these were a godsend. And I got some of the top doctors in 2 minutes to agree. And Roisin shipped 10,000. But a lot of these, they're driven by purpose. She was driven. She saw a problem affecting her sister. It's going to change the world. So I think there's a lot of really highly motivated people, and profit is good. VNS Health, they talk about no margin, no mission. You have to be profitable, otherwise you don't exist. But all profits are plowed back into healthcare.
Isn't part of the problem with the HSE is that it seems to be set on its existing relationships with suppliers or whatever, and doesn't seem to want to go beyond that. And one has to ask why that is. I mean, why we're tied into such bad deals, it seems, so often. Why in the pandemic so much money was wasted. I mean, I know it was the initial phase was an emergency, but in the end, massive investment was wasted because deals were done and they weren't the wisest deals. But that was not untypical for the way the HSE does its business. And I hear what you're saying. You're saying, well, we'll create this altruistic ring of innovators and investors and so on. But won't they be outgunned by the sharpshooters, the wise guys who come in and form relationships, that are behind closed doors with the people who are in procurement in the health service?
Well, we certainly need much better accountability and transparency. And the average procurement in the HSE, maybe it takes 3, 5, 10 years. But we proved during COVID, we did a procurement for vital signs automation. We did it in 3 weeks. So it can be done in 3 weeks. And we now have a technology. It was actually co-developed. There's a Galway company, Synchrify. It's been running in the Galway clinic for 8 years. I have another video which we don't have time to show, but the nurse there says, instead of taking 3 minutes for OBS, that's when you check temperature and all that, it's now done in a minute. And what they found in Galway clinic, that 50% of what's called the early warning scores were wrong. And that, has been proven in HSE hospitals. The early warning score is what you use to actually measure whether you're improving or disimproving. And 50% of the times is wrong. So can you imagine starting your car and 50% doesn't work? So this technology is available in the Galway clinic, developed by a Galway company. And we did a procurement. And it's now, we started in Cavan, it's in Tala, it's a multiple, and it makes the nurse's job easier. They have more time for nursing. It's much safer. But because we can find diseases or issues quickly, it's reducing the average length of stay. But the real important point of this is, what we found is that we can add new capacity just by making the hospitals more efficient, using digital and keeping patients safer. We can add new capacity into the hospitals at 1/100th of the cost of building it. So just like this, you would imagine this is such a no-brainer. The patients are safer, the nurses don't have to do all sorts of complication. and it adds in new capacity. And the internal rate of return for the economists, we've done it, is 1,100%. If you put your money into AIB or bank, maybe you get 2-3%, but this is 1,100%. Right. It pays back in 8 weeks. Yep. Every hospital in Ireland should have this. I think there's 2 things we should do. The first thing we should do is national program, what we call the health elevator. Everybody in Ireland can go to a pharmacy, they get their health tests, they can self-manage, because one of the Copernican shifts is it's not doctors know best, it's patients know best. So it's about self-care and shared care. So that's the first thing we do. And the second thing we take this Galway's company's technology, Synchrify. It's used all over NHS Scotland, and we put it into every ward in the hospital. And let's not do it. If we just do those 2 things, our health system will improve immeasurably. And then there's so many other things we can do, but just do 2 things.
Yeah. It's good to hear. Question there in the middle.
Thanks very much indeed. Andrew Murphy's my name. I have 2 conflicts to declare. I'm a general practitioner, and I was also in college at the same time as Paul Cullen, where he was a very socially prominent engineer of all things, if I recollect correctly. Yeah. I'd like to talk about patient health identifiers. That it's remarkable that in Ireland we don't have that, and it really stymies the system, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on it. An area that you haven't touched too much on is general practice, and the sort of ecosystem that you describe, the vast majority of practices are completely paperless in Ireland. They run very high quality electronic systems, but we have to print out our results for patients to drive in with their blood results to see the hospital, because there's no unique identifier to connect them. I mean, it's just remarkable. How come something like that, which is a legislative change, has just not occurred?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think, I had a slide that, Paul and Katrina said you can't show, but we are 3rd last in Europe in electronic health record maturity, but the one area where we're actually up at the top is in the GP practices, and Clan William and Eileen Byrne, they've done an amazing job with Socrates and Health One and other solutions, but the rest of the system is paperless. Now, I think that technology is ready for but we have this technology seamlessly interfacing, with that software. So you go to your pharmacy and all the GP needs to do is actually put in a couple of asterisks, and everything above the asterisks goes directly to my phone. My medication and prescriptions are on the phone, and that you will know is a big issue. If somebody comes in A&E, well, what are your medications? Or people are fumbling in their bags. So we can fix that. And coming back to the IHI, that is legislation for 5, 6, 7 years. And it's just, I actually can't, just find the words to describe why that hasn't been implemented. This inability to do anything. We've built some shared values in this community, like showing up is 50% of success. Just do it. Relationships are the foundation of accomplishment. So it's all about the culture, and the culture comes from the leader. And I'm hopeful. Bernard Gloucester came out and said, look, it's too top heavy. We're spending too much on consultants. The hospitals need to run by 7 by 24. And he's going to face opposition. But I'm already, and I understand there are changes happening. So we actually, I don't see any reason why we can't use the PPS as our health identifier. And this could be available. We did it for COVAX, and I could tell a whole other story, because we built a system called COVAX when there was already an Irish company. Health Beacon had the most advanced vaccine delivery system available. In October, I went in and actually had my flu vaccine, delivered by Health Beacon. Health Beacon are the first Irish digital health SME to go public. We had a solution available in October, and we went with a different solution, and that decision was only made on the 9th of December, and I know a lot of people in IBM had no Christmas because they had to work on that. But it comes back to the procurement. There are obvious solutions, and they're not being implemented. There's one particular company that's making a lot of money on the IHI, and they're being paying, and it's not really, now it is starting to get out there, but we've made something that actually is quite simple, really complex. And what I found at the HSE, you will meet, and there's a lot of great people. Some of the best people I've ever worked with are in the HSE, but there are also people who will give you the most elaborate and most convincing argument as to why we shouldn't do it. And this fear of doing something, it's 20 years we don't have an electronic health record. It's just crazy. And don't get me started on the Children's Hospital, because we've just made a procurement decision. The technology we've bought for the children is inoperable. The reason why the hospital was co-located with St. James's is there could be interoperability. So the Children's Hospital have now bought a technology. Now, lots of hospitals use it, but it's a billing system first, and then it's a clinical system. But if a baby's transferred from the maternity hospital, we have 5 hospitals, I think, it's a different system. So it's people have to print out. If we need an adult consultant to come over, it's a different system. So, and this system, and it is a good system, but Denmark is number 3 in the world, and is a well-documented case study that the installation of this system in Denmark was very difficult.
Martin, I'm just going to take one more question up there near the back, I think.
Hi, sorry, I'm Stuart. I work as a doctor just now in a hospital. I'm just wondering, I think a lot of these technological innovations sound really interesting. I am wondering if you have any reflections on the adoption of technology. My experience has often been that a technology or system can be introduced that is generally regarded as a good idea, but isn't implemented. And to use like a very non-clinical example, like our pay systems are now done electronically. I input my hours into an electronic system, which is electronically seen by my consultant. It's used to pay me. However, in order to get it signed off and approved that I've done the hours, I have to take a screenshot, print it, get it physically signed by my consultant, scan it. JPEGs aren't accepted from my phone. It has to be a PDF, and that has to go to payroll, despite the fact that everyone involved in the transaction can see what's happening, right? I'm wondering if you have any reflections on how to better change the culture so that the technology that you're saying can be introduced will actually be received and implemented effectively.
Yeah, it's great. So adoption is the big problem. Everybody thinks the hard thing about innovation is the idea, but the hard thing is about the adoption. But what we're seeing, the adoption rate, ideally, everything should work like an iPhone. You know, when's the last time you've consulted your iPhone manual? You take it out of the box and it works. So we need to develop the solutions that are so easy that you almost don't need any training. Now, but just to say, this is not just an Ireland problem. Within a week of leaving the HSE, I was working with the Saskatchewan Health Authority. I actually couldn't even spell it. And they actually have a major project. You know, people will know PPARs in Ireland, and that was a catastrophic system, but there is a similar problem in other countries, and we're working, actually, we figured out how, I think, to fix it in Saskatchewan. So it's a global problem, but what we need to do, and the technology is now so flexible and so malleable, we can actually make these, you know, solutions really easy to use. So it's like using Spotify, and that's the way these systems. So the technology is like, you know, the solution that's coming to the Children's Hospital, that's designed on a 1957 technology. So that's older than me. Now, there is huge IP into it, but the technology we have available today. So the lady I showed there, her daughter actually is a nurse who took her master's, and there's a technology called low code, no code. And I gave, Aisling Gannon is her name, she is a digital health manager in Sligo. I said, Aisling, here's a low code technology. Can you build an app for me for a patient with diabetes too? Now, normally it takes 15 months to develop a medical grade application, and it costs about 300,000. Yeah. Aisling developed it in a day, and I presented it to the board. That's where the technology is, and it is so intuitive. There's no training with it, so we have to make this leap forward. And there are great, and you know, I'm not knocking, there's great EHR solutions. They add huge amount of value, and they're saving lives. But it's time to leap forward. It's time to leap forward to this, where you and I take control. When I go to GP, I give my access to the GP. I have my prescription record. It's all possible. We just have to decide to do it.
Just to finish on that note, what can the people here, what can ordinary people do to move this forward? Because we're all frustrated. You can hear it, whether it's we're getting our pay or our prescriptions or whatever. What can we do? I mean, is it the way we vote, or is it?
So I think the first thing is to be hopeful. We're on the cusp of a change that is going to happen, and our collective actions can accelerate that. And the quicker we accelerate it, the more lives will be saved, the more time we will live healthily. So this is a political decision. We need a political decision. This has to be a moonshot. The very first slide, and you know, Ross Cullen is up there, you know, fabulous guy, Galwegian. The first slide I put together when I took the digital transformation job was a picture of John F. Kennedy. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon, not because it is easy, because it is hard, because that is a mission we're willing to take. It's a mission that we're unwilling to delay, and it's one we're going to be successful. So this is in plain sight. So talk to your politicians and say, put health number one. It doesn't have to cost $2 billion. This can cost us 40, 50 million a year, and we'll all live longer. We'll be better. Now, ultimately, we'll all die, but we can live 10 years more. So talk to your politicians. We need to agitate. We're close. We know it's down to leadership. I think we have a new leadership team that want to get the political support. If they get the political, we'll work from Maynooth University. And I was with AstraZeneca last week. We have 140,000 people in Ireland with chronic kidney disease. Only 7,000 or 8,000 of those are known. They're willing to fund a program where we could test everybody in the pharmacy, and they have a treatment that is very low cost. And people with chronic kidney disease, we can actually start to reverse it and manage, and people can add 10 years younger. Janssen, we met with them, PAH, pulmonary arterial hypertension. In the past, if you got that diagnosis, yeah, your life expectancy was another year. Now that can be treated, and we're working with the Mater Hospital in Sean Gain, where we're going to educate patients, and the combination of patient education and new drugs, that 1 year becomes 10 years. Wouldn't we all want that? So I would say leave with hope. We're on the cusp of a major change, but collectively we need to say enough is enough. You know, Michael Collins said, last comedy said, we've had enough of your past. Give us back our future. Let's just seize it and go forward. We know how to do this.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, if you show your appreciation for Martin. Thank you.